Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and this week we have with us a very special guest, all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. We're excited to have with us Adele Bruggeman. Adele is the founding director of Activate Her. Adele, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I know it's much better weather there in Cape Town than what we're experiencing here in Chicago, but before we dive into the work you're doing now with Activate Her, I would love to hear a little bit about your background and how, you got attracted to sports when you were growing up as a kid, and what your involvement was as you went through school and college, and then what attracted you to this kind of work.
Sure. So I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm the oldest of three girls. My dad is the oldest of four boys, so I don't think he knew what he got himself into when he had three daughters. And so in saying that, he basically raised us as how he knew how to. So I was throwing the baseball in the front yard with him. We were going to soccer practice and going to all kinds of sports events. And I never really realized that there was kind of a gendered lens to sport from very early on. My mom is also a gymnastics instructor. So when I was little, she was coaching team. And most of the time, I was just at the gym. My sisters and I, we didn't really like following the rules and attending proper gymnastics classes, but we loved to just run around the gym floor and kind of make our own games up in that space. So I think I've always been really in a universe that has sport in some aspect of my life. I played soccer and lacrosse growing up, and I was a goalie in both sports, and actually ended up going on to university. I played soccer goalie at St. Mary's College in South Bend, and actually got recruited to transfer to Notre Dame and play lacrosse. That had been my goal all along throughout high school. An opportunity just didn't work out going into freshman year, but I kept in touch with the coaches and basically became a walk-on recruit my sophomore year at Notre Dame, and had the best time ever, the best teammates, learned so much, I think, about myself and what I could balance and manage being a Division I athlete and studying at quite a challenging university at the same time. And that actually brought me to Uganda. The summer between my junior and senior year of college, I decided to do research on girls' confidence levels as they related to sport. So I spent the summer in Kampala, Uganda, and I sat in two schools. One school was a sports school, and the other school was a non-sports school. And I did a lot of observation and interviews to understand how these girls were interacting in the classroom. Were they confident? Were they speaking up in class? Were they engaging with their peers? Because Uganda is quite a paternalistic society. And in that time, it was just so interesting to see how the interactions in the classroom were quite different based on girls having or not having sports exposure. And that's, I think, when I fell in love with the African continent, being able to just be immersed in a new culture and being welcomed into new spaces, and seeing sports as a vehicle to really create sustainable change and to have conversations across languages, across countries. And that, I think, sparked my initial interest in this sports for development sector. After university, I found myself in rural South Africa, living and working at a children's home. And there I just fell more and more in love with the international development sector and seeing how I could kind of use my networks and relationships and even interest in sports in continuing to create more opportunities for children that are coming from underserved spaces. and basically wound up staying in South Africa from that point on. I did my master's at the University of Cape Town, tried my hand at field hockey. I was really terrible. So not doing that anytime soon, and have been a community development practitioner for the last 5 years or so, interning at a few different sports for development organizations locally, and then eventually finding myself where I am now, founding Activate Her.
So that's a great journey. And as you said, from an early age, you were involved in sports. You recognized, or maybe you didn't even realize what an impact it was having on your life. It was just natural within your family to be able to do that. And it's interesting because you talked about being involved in soccer and in lacrosse. Because frequently one of the complaints we see is that people are specializing in sports too early. You went all the way into college playing both sports essentially, and even transitioned during college, which is probably even more unusual. So it's a testament to doing that. Probably very different styles of goalkeeping though between soccer and lacrosse in terms of what you needed to do.
You get a few more bruises in lacrosse.
Yeah, I would imagine that ball comes in pretty quickly, and not nearly as much padding as a hockey goalie has when somebody's shooting a puck at him. So it's different. And then, as you said, field hockey is a completely different animal. And it's interesting that with St. Mary's and Notre Dame experience that nobody tried to get you to play field hockey while you were there.
Yeah, I think I was very quickly burning out on the sports field because I was just doing so much of it and it was taking over my life. So I loved it for what it was, but I'm very happily, I think now, a retired athlete.
Well, hopefully not fully retired. It's always good to keep active and keep engaged in that lifestyle. But so you talked about being in Uganda and the paternalistic type of society. Tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you were doing there.
Sure. So while I was conducting my research, I was also coaching with the Ugandan national lacrosse team. There was an NGO that had kind of began to operate in Kampala and a few villages outside of Kampala that had brought lacrosse into the country. And we were working with high school girls and basically handing them sticks and teaching them what to do from absolute basic fundamentals. But I think what was so fun, because lacrosse was different and something that they hadn't discovered before, that there wasn't any bias around picking it up and getting going. So girls didn't underestimate their abilities or think that they couldn't do it just because it was a new sport that they had never seen or played before. And it was just really fun to, I think, be a part of something that was for pure enjoyment of being able to be outdoors and be active and let them be kids. I think there's always around the globe a lack of after school programs for kids. So being able to create a safe space for them to have guided, structured programming that has really awesome mentors that are females in the sports space. For me, that was where I kind of first saw an opportunity for sports to have such a positive, transformational change in someone's life.
And it's incredible when you describe that, because there's so many of us that recognize the importance of sport and that transformational value you talked about. And then I'm sure in that environment, even more impactful when you talk about a paternalistic environment and then having the opportunity for them to have female mentors and that type of support. So when you gave us your opening about your background. You talked about falling in love with the African continent. So, what was it through your experiences that made you fall in love?
First, it is absolutely gorgeous. The landscape is incredible. And I actually shouldn't put that first because people are number one. They're so friendly and welcoming and open their doors to sharing everything and anything they have to someone that they've never met before. I lived in a house that was primarily Ugandans, and they had a lot of patience with me because I could not hand wash my laundry. So I think after watching me attempt it for about the 100th time, I would always have one of my friends swoop in and kind of rescue me and show me how it's done in the appropriate way. But also, you know, we went into the village, and these families really have next to nothing. But we were welcomed with gifts and presents and chickens. It's a very big privilege to be given a chicken. I wasn't exactly sure what to do with it, but didn't want to be insulting. So we took it home and then re-gifted it. But I think it's just the spirit of Africa that there's a sense of togetherness, and people are overcoming challenges all of the time, but they don't need to talk about it because they're in a community and everyone helps each other, and everyone just steps up to kind of welcome and bring you into that community as well. So I feel so honored that I've been able to have these experiences and continue to be able to work in community spaces on the African continent.
It's interesting when you talk to people that travel all over the world, may have started in the U.S. and gone to different countries, and um, how many of them fall in love with different cultures, different areas of the world, and I think too frequently we get over focused on the US, and a lot of the efforts focus on sort of US style service and development and everything like that. And we don't necessarily recognize how impactful things can be in other countries that maybe here in the US, even in underserved communities within the US, would be taken for granted. And then you talk about being in Africa and spoken to lots of different groups that talk about the just having a ball, like a ball for some kids that you're not even a good ball, not a new ball, something that most people would throw away, even in areas here that don't have all of the resources, would look at the ball and go, yeah, that's worn out, we can't use that. And just having something to play with, right? It takes me back to when we're kids, or you look at little kids running around, and with COVID, people are locked up. And if you don't have a ball that is sort of safe to play with in the house, and you see the stories of kids rolling up balls of socks and they're kicking those around and throwing those around because it's softer. So it's great to see that improvising and energy and everything else. So after Uganda, what was the next step for you?
After that, I wrapped up my senior year of college and was sold that I had to come back. Wherever an opportunity opened up, I needed to be back on the African continent. And so that's what led me to South Africa and working at a children's home there. I was a homeschool teacher. I was basically everything. They called us aunties and uncles, and I lived in a rondavel, which is like a round, basically hut house that has thatched roofing, and slept in a bunk bed for a year, which is no easy feat when you're 21 years old, but had the most magical time getting to share my life with these children and be able to just be a small part of their journey in life. They have overcome so many obstacles already at a young age, but are constantly waking up with positive energy, a lot of singing and dancing and soccer playing, and ready for that next day. And I think that's something we all need to return back to a bit more, is just being thankful for all that we have, even in times that don't really feel like there's much to be thankful for.
Yeah, it's as you said, it's that energy and excitement is something that goes away. And I think one of the challenges, the U.S. in particular, I'm sure in other parts of the world as well, where the play element has sort of been taken away from sports, and it's gotten to this sort of miniaturized version of professionalism where kids at very young ages are in hyper structured, over structured training regimens and practice regimens. And when I was growing up, even though I played organized soccer from U8 up, which was early at that point, now my son, when he started playing, was playing at 4. Um, but most of the time it was just like grab a ball after school and go out to the field and start kicking it around, and whoever shows up, and you make up goals and you make up rules and you make up teams just on an ad hoc basis, and you enjoy it. It's truly play. You don't have supervision, you don't have the rules, you don't have the coaching. You just figure out what can you do. You watch somebody else do it, you try it. The stakes aren't that high. You don't have to worry about how everything works. So I definitely resonate with that whole element. Um, so now you're done sleeping in the bunk bed, and you've got these kids that have all of this energy. What was the next step for you?
I very temporarily moved back to the States and was working for an international NGO out of San Francisco. We were working in sub-Saharan Africa, but I was at the US branch, and I was getting stories. We focused on girls' education, and so I would get stories and reports of what was happening on the ground in these communities. And I would basically need to turn them into reports for our donors or social media content. And living in San Francisco is lovely. It's very challenging to work in a nonprofit and live in San Francisco. But other than that, it was really challenging for me to get these stories on paper and try to turn them outward to our supporters, because I had never met these girls and young women. And I felt so disconnected, and basically that I shouldn't have that right and that responsibility to share their stories. And it basically, I think that experience pulled me back to South Africa because I wanted to just feel that connection. It's very important to always connect what's happening on the ground to your donor base and to all of the amazing people that are supporting your work. But for me personally, I just needed that connection back in my life. And so I decided very quickly that I should do a master's degree at the University of Cape Town. So moved back to Cape Town after only having actually spent 4 or 5 days here on holiday. So I was a bit crazy at the time. I felt very confident that this was the right move for me. And I guess retrospectively it was, because I'm still here. But yeah, I came to the University of Cape Town and I studied a master's degree in social policy and management, which has basically led me to where I am now. I jumped into doing a lot of work as a community development practitioner, and worked with a number of different local community-based organizations. So very much grassroots, hands-on. We did a lot of capacity building and kind of like fundraising and grant making support to help make what's already happening on the ground really sustainable. And that taught me a lot, I think, about Activate Her and how I wanted to shape Activate Her before it was really created into what it is today, is just having this community interaction and prioritizing what's actually happening on the ground and empowering the people who are in these communities to be their own change makers.
So you really had some great experience leading up to your desire to start Activate Her and launch that. And that's something that we often see people working, and then just like that entrepreneurial spirit, everybody has a company and thinks that they can go out and do it. Starting an organization is very difficult and challenging to get it off the ground. So tell us about that early phase of Activate Her, what your vision was, and what some of the challenges you experienced going through the process.
Sure. So I don't think, people might say otherwise, but I don't think I necessarily had intentions of actually starting an organization. I think I recognize now that I am very much a dreamer. So I love to think very aspirationally about what could be. But in my job at the time, I was working with an after school program that specifically worked with girls, but they focused on STEM-based learning. And I would go and I would kind of participate and observe those sessions. But these girls weren't getting active. They were in grades 5 to 7 and already were living a very sedentary lifestyle. They would go to school, they would go to these after school programs, they would basically be sitting all day long. And having a few conversations and knowing a bit about the South African education system, PE is a requirement, but teachers often are underpaid and overworked, which I know happens all over the world. But PE doesn't become the priority and falls through the cracks. And kids often just don't have access because no one stays to kind of facilitate that session. And when the after school program came to me, they said, we have a crazy idea. We're starting a school. I was like, all right, I'm on board. How can I help you? And they say, well, you have a sports background. You've been running sports days with our girls that are already in this program. What do you think about bringing on the after school sports component to our school? And I was like, no, not me. That's not my role. That's not my place. And so we spoke with a few other local organizations who already were established in the sports development sector. And everyone we spoke to said, oh, sorry, we don't have female coaches. Oh, sorry, we don't work in this community. Oh, sorry, we don't have funding. And I looked at the director of the school and I was like, well, what are we going to do now? And she's like, let's go. You've got this. You've got all of the skills. We can build this out. And she is one of the founding board members for Activate Her. But the challenging parts, I think, bureaucracy is bureaucracy. So paperwork always is going to exist. But I think for me, the most challenging parts, I guess, is, and still is at this point in time, is the fact that the school doesn't have a field. So we're very resourceful. We operate as kind of lean as we can, and we try to just get creative. And I don't want to say that's necessarily a challenge from the get-go of like founding an organization, but it's kind of a circumstance of the context in which we operate. And yeah, I think when you have big dreams and aspirations, you don't start with this glamorous setup, but you always have where you're going front of mind. And I think that's where Activate Her is now, is that we have big plans and big ambitions for what we're going to achieve and accomplish and how many girls and women we're going to get in our program. We're just starting to get there, but it's about taking action. I think believing in what you can achieve as an individual and taking that action, not waiting for someone to invite you or to ask you or to maybe demand that you start doing something, but see a gap, fill a gap, just keep moving forward. I think that for me is how I overcome many challenges that come our way and Activate Her.
So what year did you launch Activate Her?
So we were building our constitution at the end of 2017 and officially got our nonprofit status on January 3rd, 2018. So we've just had our third birthday.
Well, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
January is a
Yes.
great month for birthdays. That's the month for sports philanthropy as well. We just turned 2, and um, it's uh, it's great to see organizations that are really stepping up and getting things done quickly. I loved your comments about um, making big plans and having big ambitions, because that's what you have to do to really push things through. As you said, the challenges of when you were going and they wanted you to get involved, and they say to you, there's no female coaches, there's no funding, right? We don't have a spot for you. So you went and created your own spot. You went and created your own vision with that type of work. So you've now, as you said, just had your 3rd birthday, so you're moving ahead. I want to hear what these big plans and big ambitions are. Give us a sense of where you see things going.
Sure. So when we started our program the first year, it was with a brand new school. So there were 4 girls enrolled in the school. And we grew at the end of the first year, there were 38 girls. And then the second year, I believe we hit about 90. The third, now I'm getting my math wrong. We currently have 108 girls in the school. So we have constantly been growing, but we've been piloting just with this initial partner school, but are hitting a point that we've kind of critiqued and improved on our current curriculum, but we're getting ready to hopefully be able to bring on some coaches and scale to a few more local schools and girls groups in the current community that we work. But going from there, at the moment, we're growing with the school. And so every year the girls get a year older. And that means our current curriculum reaches girls from the ages of 3 to 10. Going into this year, we'll have 11, 12-year-olds. And so we're going to be building out our curriculum for these different age groups. The ideal breakdown would be that we offer programming to girls from the age of 3 all the way through to 18, and then capture them between the ages of 18 and 30 as our coaches. And the reason being for that is we believe that if you incorporate sports and play from a girl's kind of first interaction in school, we're stopping gender stereotypes from being formed. So they constantly are saying, I'm a girl, I play sports, I'm physically active, this is what we do. And so I guess going into kind of where we're going, it's getting to a place that we can continue to grow and scale our curriculums to new communities within South Africa, hopefully outside of South Africa by collaborating and partnering with other organizations on the African continent. In the US, I'm super ambitious and believe in sports development so deeply that I just really want to get our curriculum out to any and all organizations that are working with girls and maybe are focusing on STEM or they're focusing on education, but don't have a sports component to their work. We are also in the process of launching a social enterprise, which is called Her Active. And it's an ethical and eco-friendly activewear brand that is going to be generating an income that will be reinvested into Activate Her. So that's kind of my current ambition that we're working on building. But we also have hopes and visions of creating possibly like community-based female gyms. So maybe an African version of Curves, but super inclusive, super fun, and super accessible. And, from there, anything that keeps empowering girls and women and prioritizes their health, like I love applying creativity and innovation to this sector. I think there's just endless opportunities. So that really energizes me to just keep working and pushing forward.
Well, so those are some big plans there to launch your own apparel brand, to launch the gyms and the facilities. Those are some significant undertakings. So I certainly commend you for, as you said, dreaming big and pushing to really make a change, because those are things, um, at least in my experience in South Africa, didn't exist a lot of female initiatives of that magnitude. So tell our audience how people can reach out to you if they have ideas of how they can help. Obviously, we know finances is always a way people can help and make donations, but what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so we've got a website. It's www.activateher.org. And so there's links to be able to pop us an email. Otherwise, you can find us on social media. We're very active on Facebook and Instagram, and both of those handles are at activate.her. So we're always very open to having people get involved in our work and find fun, creative ways to possibly do that, running a race or wanting to volunteer your skills, maybe rather than your finances, to help us in an area that we're developing and expanding. So, yes, we would love to connect with anyone that wants to get involved with Activate Her further.
Well, Adele, congratulations on all of that outstanding work. Before we let you go, though, I do want to put you on the spot for a minute here, and we're going to use our sports philanthropy superpowers and wave our magic wand, and we're going to say, Adele, if you could be commissioner of any sport, tell us what sport you would like to be commissioner of, and then as a follow-up question, give us what your first rule change or policy change would be in that sport as you think about all of the sports that you played. You talked about soccer and lacrosse. Obviously, you're probably a fan of other sports as well, and maybe you've adopted South African sports with cricket and rugby and other things like that. So tell us what would draw your attention.
Oh, this is a tough question. I feel like I don't know if I go the fun route or the like responsible
Sure.
route. I think off of the top of my head, I would just say lacrosse because it's something I know and that I love. And in high school, I feel like it was always this, and I guess high school going into college, but it's always this competition in lacrosse of like, is girls lacrosse or boys lacrosse like more intense and cooler and harder? And so it is a funny thing that it's the same sports and the rules are relatively similar, but there's this distinct divide between girls and boys. And I guess for me as a goalie, I was wearing the helmets, I was wearing those pads, and I don't think this distinct divide should continue on. I think I really loved playing women's lacrosse, and I think there's a lot of skills involved that you might not necessarily apply in men's lacrosse because the play is done differently, but creating maybe a fusion that standardizes both sports to have the same rules and men and women are both playing, I think that would really look neat and start to kind of break down this divide that continues to remain in sports between men's sports and women's sports, and a hierarchy of who's better and what sports are more competitive or whatnot.
Yeah, I think there's always that distinction. I know uh, one of the big issues between the sports, obviously, as you said, you talked about the helmets and the concussion issues become very different because of the helmet. But there's certainly, having been at quite a few youth and high school lacrosse events, both men and women, watching the boys and the girls, it's still a physical game. People will look at it and try and tell you that the men's game is very physical and the women's game is not, but that's really not accurate when you go and watch these games. I remember when we were doing concussion work, being with some of the parents of the girls who had been knocked out of games and because of the way the sport is played, and in some ways, uh, it's people aren't taking care of themselves, right? They're more aggressive and doing things that you might not think is going on until you get a chance to go and see the intensity with which the game is played. And that's one thing that I always loved about sports is that no matter what your personal feelings are about a particular sport, when you go and watch the people competing in that sport, it's always intense. There's no such thing as competition without intensity, right? That's just, hitting a ball around, throwing in the park, whatever. But when you get into competition at any level, right, that intensity certainly as you get high school, college, and beyond, every single sport is just very intense, very physical, and it's amazing to see. So, again, Adele, I want to thank you for coming on with us today. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
Yes, thank you. I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you taking the time to join us for the Sports Philanthropy podcast. This is your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. We hope you'll tune in for our next episode. Please don't forget to live generously. Thank you.